Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Frances Moore Lappé, a democracy advocate and world food and hunger expert who has authored or co-authored 18 books. She is the co-founder of 3 organizations, including Food First, the Institute for Food and Development Policy, the Center for Living Democracy, and the Small Planet Institute, which she is currently leading with her daughter, Anna Lappé. Lappé's first book, Diet for a Small Planet, originally published in 1971, has sold 3 million copies and was labeled by J.M. Hirsch for Associated Press as, quote, the blueprint for eating with a small carbon footprint since long before that term was coined. Lappé's most recent books include Hope's Edge, The Next Diet for a Small Planet, co-authored with her daughter Anna in 2002, Democracy's Edge, Choosing to Save Our Country by Bringing Democracy to Life, 2006, and Getting a Grip 2, Clarity, Creativity, and Courage for the World We Really Want, just out in 2010. Lappé has received 17 honorary doctorates from distinguished institutions and has held various teaching positions. During 2000-2001, she was a visiting scholar at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1987, Lappé became the 4th American to receive the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel. Among other honors, she received the 2003 Rachel Carson Award from the National Nutritional Foods Association, the 2008 Humanitarian of the Year Award by the James Beard Foundation, and she was named by the Women's National Book Association as one of 12 living women whose words have changed the world. On April 5, 2010, Frances Moore Lappé gave a lecture at the U of O entitled Getting a Grip, Gaining Clarity, Creativity, and Courage for the World We Really Want. That was the 2009-2010 Luther S. and Dorothy Cecilia Cressman Lecturer in the Humanities. The Cressman Lecture was also part of the Year of the Book lecture series. Frances, welcome to UO Today.
Thank you, Barbara.
We are so pleased to have you. We've been waiting all year for you to come.
Oh, wow.
It's good of you to take time to speak with us in this format, too.
I'm delighted.
Your name is largely synonymous with the title of your first book, Diet for a Small Planet. Everyone says, oh, the woman who wrote that book.
Right.
That goes back a ways.
A ways, yeah.
Do you
40 years next year it will be.
40 years, indeed,
Yes.
in 2011.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you remember what inspired you back then?
I do. I remember it as if it were yesterday in some ways, because it was the turning point in my life. It was the aha moment. It was the first step into adulthood, in a sense, because I can remember sitting at the UC Berkeley Agricultural Library. I think I ended up there because it was the least inhabited, so that I could kind of follow my nose as I asked the most basic question of all. Why are people hungry? I figured if I could just understand why there's hunger in the world, that would unlock the mysteries of economics and politics that just seem so impenetrable. And so I was very influenced by all of the experts who were telling us that we'd run out of food, we'd hit the Earth's limits. In Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb Exploded, and this was all very scary, and said, okay, have we really run out of food? Well, in my following my nose, a journey, I soon learned, very soon learned, that there was more than enough food in the world to make us all chubby. And then I had to ask, why hunger in a world of plenty? And that then has led to the next question, to the next question, to the question that brought me to Getting a Grip, which is, why are we creating a world that we as individuals would never choose? In fact, that we abhor, because not one person would say, yes, I think it's a great idea that more children go hungry, and I'll do my part to make that happen. You know, I mean, it's just not who we are, and yet that's the world we're creating today. So that was the beginning. That was the beginning of everything I've done since.
It really does still drive your work. I see in your preamble to this latest book, you say that you had a sudden moment of realization that not only is it still the case, it's worse than it was. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to grope, to get my hands around, in that sense that, yes, and the moment that you describe, I'm sitting at the kitchen table on Thanksgiving morning, and it's one of my favorite holiday, and yet my heart is just torn because I have to face that, in fact, there are now over 1 billion people going hungry, many more than when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet. And yet we know so much more, and we've had record crops, and we're still producing more than enough to make us all chubby if people had access to it. So what I guess over the decades you can say that I have come to understand that we live in this both-and world, that we're moving in two directions very fast. Things are getting very much better and very much worse, both at the same time.
Let me just stop on that one phrase. You said a both-and world,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Okay, so things are getting much better,
and they are getting much worse. As I just say, in terms of the environmental collapse that we're experiencing, and in terms of the number of people suffering from hunger, even though there is still more than enough to make us all quite, plump, as I put it. So I guess, my current struggle is, more than anything, for how to help others, including myself, avoid despair and a feeling of hopelessness, because it's the bad news that keeps hitting the international marquee. It's the bad news of hunger and poverty and ecological devastation. And I believe that that sense of powerlessness that is the consequence of despair and just bombardment of bad news is the real crisis that we have to worry about, because solutions to hunger are known, solutions to the environmental crisis are known. So the real crisis then is only our feeling of powerlessness, and that's why I wrote Getting a Grip. How do we find our power to hold it all, the good and the bad, and then to see the entry points to reverse the spiral of powerlessness?
Let's go back just about 40 years one more time, though.
Sure.
Why do you think that Diet for a Small Planet had such a huge impact in 1971?
Well, I think that my personal questioning, my personal journey intersected with a cultural questioning. So many people, as you know, this was during the period of the late 60s and early 70s where people were challenging the dominant culture, and many people were going back to the land and challenging the war in Vietnam. And Students for a Democratic Society wrote the Port Huron Statement, which is really about citizen engagement. And so I think it struck that nerve because it gave people a sense of what we each very personally can do. It connected us, what we do multiple times a day, which put food into our mouths. It connects us with the earth itself and with one another and with the fate of others around the world. So I think that it struck a chord the same way it did for me, why I got so excited that, oh, yes, if I can just sort out the food problem, if I can find my way to a diet that's healthy for my body, healthy for the earth, and healthy for all people, then all the other problems would sort themselves out. And in the sense that following my food, using food as a thread of understanding has served me well. And I feel that it's kept me going and to keep questioning. I really do think that that was a good intuition.
I think it's rare for a book to continue to be quite as powerful and as popular several decades down the road.
Yeah, it still sells more than my other books, so I'm very happy about that in many ways.
You've heard firsthand that a lot of people here in the Eugene audience, people who have happened to meet you already on your visit, have had a strong personal impact from your writing.
Yeah.
I was really interested to see that both Diet for a Small Planet and the most recent book, Getting a Grip, were listed for incoming President Obama as must-read books.
Yeah, that made me so happy.
Did he do so? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think we should find out. So now, if the situation is still bringing you to tears on a Thanksgiving morning, as we give thanks for the plentiful food that we are preparing for our loved ones, what have you learned about how food issues have changed in the 40 years since you wrote the first book? How are things changing? They're better and they're worse. How are they worse?
Our food system, that is the dominant one that we hear about and experience in the United States, is one in which control is concentrating, because as I explain in the book, we're sort of playing Monopoly instead of living democracy, meaning that we've all played Monopoly. We know what happens in Monopoly. In my house, it was the end of the evening, my brother had all the best property, and I couldn't afford Baltic Avenue. So in the food economy, it's Monsanto now. If you look at one company, talk about playing Monopoly, one company, Monsanto, controls the germplasm in 80 to 90+% of the corn and soy seed in this country, in the U.S., major crops. And guess what is the result? Since 2001, the price for these seeds has been growing at 4 to over 6 times faster than the consumer price index. So that's the dominant system. We see it in every aspect of agribusiness, control, concentrating, because we've fallen for this kind of bizarre idea that the market works on its own, that it doesn't need a democracy to keep the market open. To keep it really fair and free means we have to step up as citizens and get the lobbying power, the corporate contributions to our legislators out of the way so that we citizens can be heard and keep the market fair for the small farmer, for the new organic farmer, etc. So that's on the one hand. And in this both-and world, on the other hand, what we see in every country is in every part of the world where people are rediscovering a way to relate to the earth, evidence we didn't have when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet, that there are ways of growing food healthfully using what is generally called agroecology, meaning an agriculture that is really working with the laws of nature, that can actually end up creating more food and, of course, more sustainable food production because we're enriching the soil as we go, and we are helping prevent climate change. My daughter, Anna Lappé, is just out with a book called Diet for a Hot Planet, where she makes this point that organic agriculture, not dependent on the conglomerate, the monopoly-controlled industrial food, the industrial chemical suppliers, that organic agricultural production can uses, in terms of produces carbon emissions at a rate as much as half of the dominant industrial, chemical, extractive model, from 1/3 to 1/2 as much carbon emissions. So what's happening, and these are the stories that I love to tell, whether we're talking about Africa or India or Eugene, where there is a local food economy burgeoning. And I just learned that here around Eugene, 50 years ago, there were maybe 150 crops grown, and then it shrunk down to around 30, and now it's beginning to expand again with beans, different variety of beans growing, and even some basic grains, and maybe some sunflower for oils. So this is the both-and world, and even in the most desperate situations, like in India, I've been looking at an area in Andhra Pradesh. Have you ever heard about the Indian suicides by farmers in India as being a terrible tragedy there?
No, please tell me.
Well, in India, as in many places here in the U.S. too, farmer suicides are higher than in some other professions. But in India, what happened is farmers have gotten hooked on, in this case, in this area of Andhra Pradesh, hooked on genetically modified seeds that they had to purchase from Monsanto. And when the crops did not produce, according to what was promised, where they'd put out all this money to buy the seeds, they were desperate and many committed suicide. So the women took leadership to reclaim traditional Indian food growing practices with diversified crops and with local seeds, and are re-establishing agriculture there. And these illiterate women have learned videography, so they are actually recording this move in this direction and learning how to create their own food security networks by keeping stores of food and together deciding as villages which are the families who may need extra at the end of the season. And this is just one of the many examples around the world of, I could talk about land reform in Brazil, for example, where there are now 1/3 million families on land that through the new constitution in Brazil in the 1980s has been redistributed to small farmers, many of them now growing organic food and creating small businesses in schools. So there's so much more we know now than we did when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet about what works. At the same time, we see the devastation from the industrial concentration of control.
One of the reasons your work is so very effective, I think, is because you have a gift for interspersing discussion of very serious, really daunting problems with anecdotes that illustrate how pockets of populations are making a difference. That's obviously one of your strategies.
Oh, absolutely. I think we remember stories above all. And so all my books are storybooks. That's what I say now. Every single book that I've written in this last decade is a storybook, because that's what people, and I myself, you know, that's what is so exciting. And what, despite the, you know, this both-and world, the other thing you can say about a both-and world, choices are very clear, right? So in one way, we are alive, you and I, Barbara, at this moment when there are these two pathways. One is toward absolute devastation, as we are, I think, I learned from my daughter, I listened to her speak in New York last week, and she said that we've lost half of our topsoil since 1960 in this country. And you must have heard also about the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico that are created by the agricultural runoff, a devastating form of destruction, and of course the hazards to farmers and farm workers from the massive use of pesticides that continues. So, but I guess what keeps me going, and I assume therefore I'm like other people, what keeps me going is to read about and to meet people who are having the courage. It's all about courage, Barbara, to break with that failing model and to say, no, there is a much better way. And it may look a lot different. It may look a little messy because we're experimenting with different, you know, with how nature does things. It's not always so neat rows and clean lines, but it's resilient. It builds soil so that with climate change coming, that the soil can withstand the variations in rainfall. And so what keeps me going really are the stories of people who have found that courage to break with the failing model.
I wanted to go back to a key word in what you advocate, and that is democracy. You mentioned it a couple of minutes ago.
One of my favorite words in English.
Yes, I thought it might be, in fact. And what you advocate for is what you would call living democracy as opposed to thin democracy. Yeah. Would you explain the difference between the two?
I am happy to. I think thin democracy is a bit of a, it's too nice, but you know, I'll stick with it for now because I wrote it in the book. But thin democracy is what I thought we had, you know, growing up. That democracy, what is it? It's a market economy and an elected government. It's these two things, and we're home free. You know, that I was born into it. There's nothing I need to do except maybe shop, and if I want to, vote. But that's optional. And it's all in place. It's all done for me or to me by somebody somewhere. But it doesn't really engage me. And it doesn't work. As I traveled the world and saw country after country where there were elections, a market, and people were living in misery. You know, half the children in India are stunted by malnutrition. They have a democracy. That's thin. So living democracy is a very different understanding. It is one I think is aligned with real human nature. Because human nature, and there's a revolution now in understanding what is human nature, and we're realizing through new neuroscience and psychology and breakthroughs in anthropology that human beings by nature are cooperative, and we're hardwired to be empathetic, and we are doers. I mean, think about it. How could we ever have gotten to these complex societies if we weren't can-doers, you know? And yet, this thin democracy says, oh no, we'll do it for you, laid back, you know, just fit into the corporation, just fit in, and nothing really for you to do to create a community that works. So living democracy is based on the idea that democracy is not a set system. It is a set of system values of fairness and inclusion and mutual accountability. I'm not just holding you accountable, I'm accountable. And it infuses not just political life, but economic life, like in cooperatives where I'm actually a member. And do you know that there are more people who are members of cooperatives, or at least as many, this is a very rough calculation, but it's comparable. The number of people who are members of cooperatives in the world and the numbers who own shares in publicly traded companies. So it's not a small thing. So it's stepping up both in the enterprise and in the society to create the rules that engage us and in a rewarding way, not just leaving our fate to other people. So living democracy is kind of like an eco-democracy in the sense that it's based on relationship, which is the basis, of course, of ecological science.
One of your catchphrases to do with living democracy is deceptively simple. You describe it as a government governing for the public good.
Hey, what a concept.
But you make the point that it's also a vibrant culture, and
yes,
that we all
that
need
it's
to play a
not
role
just a structure of government, but it is money out and citizens in. And what I mean by that, one figure, $3.5 billion last year spent by lobbyists to sway our people that we have elected, over 24 lobbyists for every person that you and I elect to represent us there. And that's how this concentrated control comes to be, because none of us would think it makes a lot of sense for 1% of us to 1% of households to control as much wealth as the bottom 90%. So none of us would really think that could work. But to create a system where wealth circulates, so we can all participate in the market, means that we have to get money out of the system and get our voices in. And so I argue in all of my work that there's a proven way to do that. It's working in 3 states, and I tell about my superhero, Deb, in Maine, who benefited from, she's in one of those 3 states in Maine, where they have voluntary public financing. And she was a waitress in the year 2000, and a high school educated waitress. But she had leadership qualities that her friends saw in her, and she could run for office and become an outstanding legislator that has helped put in place groundbreaking environmental legislation because she could rely on voluntary public financing. She could get a certain amount of small donations of $5 and then become a viable candidate. Then the public money kicked in, and she has now been reelected 4 times. So that's what can happen. She doesn't have to listen to the corporate influence trying to influence her. She can listen to the citizens of her state.
Corporate money out.
And the depths of the world in.
Yes.
Right.
I'm going to show your most recent version of this book to the camera so that we can get a good close look at it. And I have a question for you to lead off. This is a very impressive book in many ways. But my first question for you is, it's a thorough revision of the edition you put out in 2008, which is only
2007.
2007, yeah. My mistake, sorry. But still, that's not a long time. No. There was enough to revise in
Absolutely.
3 years that you needed to overhaul it?
Oh my goodness. So think about what happened. Bush out, Obama in, and the financial collapse. Yeah. So it felt like it feels as if we are in a different world. And also what I learned so much there in the new anthropology and psychology that has come out in the last couple of years. And so in the beginning of the book, I wanted to include that because we now know there's a whole new theory about our evolution that I find absolutely fascinating, relying on the work of Sarah Blaffer Hardy, who's an anthropologist at UC Berkeley. So I wanted to bring it up to the current era of the post-financial collapse. And because it is a distillation of my life's work in a way, I want actually to redo it every few years, and I want it to be a collaboration with my readers. I want them to see this as something they can weigh in on. So we have a very active website at gettingagrip.org. And I think this era I don't think of the web as superseding or dislodging books. I see it as an opportunity for using the web to interact with my readers. And for me, books are, great treasures, and I love books, and I don't think I would ever like a world without them, but I think we can use the web to engage in a conversation so that our books can be richer.
So the next one, this one is Getting a Grip 2. You'll
right.
have a series.
I hope so. I hope so.
We'll see. 4. I'm still intrigued by your unique talent for getting people where they live, for speaking in significant ways to individuals. And so I was looking at your book with that question in mind. How does she do it? And I'm very impressed with the design of this book. I don't know how much you had to do with that, but it's very cleverly put together. There are these wonderful graphics in the inside cover and the back cover. There's the use of, there aren't very many capitals at the beginning of section titles. There are many, many short sections. The whole thing is user-friendly, beautifully clean. It's a very attractive, very easy, user-friendly book. Is that your design principle?
I'd like to take some credit for it. I mean, what I was seeking is just what I like to read, a book that really welcomes me in, that a book that, it's sort of like in mouthfuls that I can handle and not have to see the whole meal at once maybe, and for I can really know where the author is going with this. So I have in each chapter, almost each chapter has I call them idea 1 through 8. So you can see, for example, I have a whole chapter on fear because I think that that's what holds us back. So it's partly psychological, very personal, and I include my own struggle with fear. And so then it has the old thoughts and new thoughts about fear and a little summary. And I guess I also have fantasy that maybe some people would want to use some of these in their own lives and maybe photocopy and put it on the refrigerator or something. So I try to, something that people can take away is the kind of book that I want to read.
Frances, with its narratives, its great stories, this fabulous layout, what this struck me as is something analogous to a book of meditations. I can take a few pages, read one subheading, and it's given me a thought for the day. Is that a deliberate plan, or is that a happy accident?
Well, I'm delighted if you feel that way. I think in the sense that what I want in a book is very much, something that I can hold on to. And so I've tried to structure the book that way, that each chapter and even some subsections, as you say, they really will have a complete that you can take away. And so I think that all of us are looking, or virtually all of us are looking for a way of seeing the world so that our actions, of course, any one of us, our actions are small in the grand scheme, but that we can see a way, a pattern. We can see a pattern so that we can see how our individual action is shifting the entire pattern toward life, toward health. So that's really my goal. And then, so each section of the book then adds one more piece to that idea of how we can intervene in the spiral that's taking us downward and begin to reverse it. So I'm hoping very much that it has that impact that you suggest.
I think it does. We're going to have to close in a minute, but I do want to say that I think it's part of the brilliance of every piece of your writing is that it makes it seem doable, and that is the principle we all need to embrace, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I invite our viewers of this program to go back and watch your Eugene lecture, and I thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Barbara.
We've been speaking with Frances Moore Lappé, writer, democracy advocate, and author of Diet for a Small Planet. On April 5th, 2010, she gave a lecture entitled Getting a Grip, Gaining Clarity, Creativity, and Courage for the World We Really Want. She was the guest of the Oregon Humanities Center. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.